There are really three things that I judge cameras by, and that's, can I create work that I love with them? Do I like the process to get there? And then finally, am I confident that I can reliably do this repeatedly? I always get to this point with Sony cameras where I make work that I like and that I love, but I don't enjoy using them. And I got to that point and I have some old Canon EF glass lying around and thought to myself, well, maybe I could try the Canon R6 Mark II because this seems like it could be a good all-around camera, photo and video. I knew that it could take really good photos because I shot a wedding with it previously, but can it fulfill the video side?
I just felt helpless. I didn't know what to do. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what his quality of life was gonna look like. We took him to the vet and they diagnosed him with IBIS. His surgery was about $7,000 and we did it twice. A lot of people wouldn't have paid that amount of money for a dog. They would have just put him down.
This was my worst fear, that it would happen to him again. The video that you just saw was a short excerpt in a mini documentary about our dog Cosmo, who has IBDD. It's a degenerative disc disease, and I think that he's had an interesting life and also an even more interesting message. But I shot all of that footage with just the Canon R6 Mark II, with the exception of the B cam for the interviews was the Sony A7sIII. I really ended up loving the colors that came out of this. I mean, no surprise, Canon colors, everybody talks to death about them. But I shot this whole thing in 4K 24 minus like 1 or 2 clips, I think are 4K 60, IPB autofocus to see like how's the autofocus gonna behave in a setting like this, because I'm a single person, I don't have a first AC, nobody's pulling focus, and I might switch back and forth to manual focus, but how good is the autofocus gonna be? And then also I had the in-body image stabilization turned off. And that leads us really to the disappointing part about this camera, the dreaded Canon wobble. I took the Canon R6 Mark II on a trip to Yosemite. We take trips to Yosemite often, usually about at least once a season. And these end up being really good trips to test out camera gear, because I like to go up there and I like to take one camera. I enjoy the trips that I take up there where I don't have to focus on camera gear. And that means taking one camera to do both photo and video, whatever really kind of I'm in the mood for that day. Yosemite is full of really high dynamic range scenes, and it tests out camera sensors really well, because in the valley, you have the high granite walls that kind of shade the valley at certain times, and then you have the sky, which is often a completely different exposure than what is in the valley. This camera did well, but not as well as the Sonys that I'm used to, the A7 IV, the A7S III do as far as dynamic range goes. After shooting both photo and video, I got home and I uploaded all of my footage and photos, and I find in some of my footage that the corners are wobbling, and what that refers to is the stabilization in the camera. It seems like they designed this with photo in mind primarily and didn't consider the fact that we're going to use it for video, because in photo it works great. You can handhold close to a second, maybe even more than that. But in video, when you use the mechanical stabilization, it wobbles in the corner and it really just kind of ruins the footage. There's really not a whole lot that you can do in post to fix that. I use a Canon EF 24-70 most of the time, which does not have stabilization in the lens. And so I just turn on the mechanical stabilization in the camera. You can also turn the enhanced stabilization, which is software stabilization on top of the mechanical, which I did do, and it makes it better. You don't see it as often, but there are still moments where you can see the little kind of like waving and wobble in the corners. This camera has all of the right specs. It has fantastic autofocus. We had hummingbirds that made a nest at our house, and I essentially documented that whole journey and would go down every morning and shoot some photos and shoot some video of this hummingbird who'd made a nest and then eventually laid eggs, and then those eggs hatched and those fledglings then grew up, and we got to see that whole process. The autofocus is incredible in that it locked onto the hummingbirds themselves, but then also even onto their eyes, which to me is just insane. It has good high ISO performance, dual card slots, full frame 4K 60. All of these make it great for weddings and portrait work and should be a good all-around camera to use. I've shot interviews, B-roll for both clients, nonprofits, and the camera has worked well for the most part. But the stabilization wobble in this camera leaves me feeling insecure and not confident that when I get home and upload the footage that I'm not going to see that in the footage and potentially ruin it. Could you use a gimbal? For sure. That's typically not my style because I don't want to take that around. Obviously for production and things like that, that may be called for in certain scenarios. But I'm someone who likes to shoot handheld, and so really the solution I think would be to rig it up, put a monitor on it, put a V-mount battery on it, make it a little heavier and turn off the stabilization and use it that way. I think that's really the only viable solution for filmmaking for this camera. All in all, it's a fantastic photo camera with the right video specs plagued by one really significant problem. I love the results that I get from it for the most part. I really enjoy the process and it inspires me to shoot, but I'm not confident that I can create those results reliably and repeatedly without having issues that ultimately I can't fix. I hope that you found this video informative. If you have questions or concerns, please feel free to leave them down in the comments. My name is David J. Roscoe, and I will see you in the next one.